What is up, everyone? Welcome to Comic Culture. My name is Nick. We're going to do the weekly comic book review. That's right, it is time for Nick at Night. I just got done reading all my books. I'm going to go over each and every one of them. Coming up next, stick around. All right, welcome back to the video. So we're about to get into it. We're going to pop up the grading bar here, and how that works is every time I go over a book, I'm going to put it on this grading bar just to give you an idea of how it ranks compared to the other books that came out that week. So let's get into it right away. We have the big two first, as we always do. We're going to jump into Venom number 9 from Al Ewing, Brian Hitch on here, and Ron V occasionally jumps on this book, although he hasn't been on here in quite a while, and because he's been rather busy lately with a few other titles. And I think one of the big problems with this book right now is I can essentially pull my past reviews and just pull them forward, and it's the exact same opinion. I think I just don't like this book too much. I don't understand the basic conflict we have right now with like Meridius. We have Kang introduced, which is kind of like a breath of fresh air because everything else is rather boring, I think. We have Eddie Brock trying to like mess around with the time stream a little bit, trying to protect Dylan the best he can. So some of the events that we saw in previous issues of Venom are actually explained in this book, because they were a little bit out of context at the time. But when you're dealing with time travel, you can do things like that. You can play through a scenario and it's a little bit confusing, and then later on you can see how a time traveling event could have caused that to happen. So that's basically what this book is about. But again, I'm not really invested in the actual characters or the story they're trying to tell here. I'm not a big fan of Brian Hitch's artwork. I don't know why I'm reading this book still, honestly. I have Venom Lethal Protector, which I think is a much better Venom book. Although it's out of, the main continuity and everything, it's still just like a fun, nostalgic read. And then Carnage is actually doing a better job as well from a symbiote front, and that's actually written by Ron V, and the art's better too. So I don't know why I'm reading this book, so please give me an answer about why I'm still reading this book. I think it's just because I'm holding out hope that Ron V and Al Ewing will kind of turn this around. But I just don't see where it's going. We're 9 issues in. It is a $4 book, which is okay. And so I just don't know. I don't know why I don't know what I'm doing with this book. Let me know. Let me know why I should be reading this book still. If you have a reason. All right, the next Marvel book we read this week was a new #1, Ant-Man from Al Ewing. I think we have Tom Riley on the art. We have Jordi Belair, if I'm not mistaken, on the colors. So I was anticipating this to be like a kind of like a retelling, perhaps. I was hoping it would be a retelling of the Ant-Man story because I really don't know too much about the character outside of the MCU. And judging on the art here, maybe I was going to have like an old school flair to it. And that's kind of the case, but maybe not necessarily. We do have a classic story in here, kind of set back in the day, but it's also a bait and switch in a way, just because the beginning of this book kind of hints at a future landscape, and we're kind of pulling characters from the past. And so it's a little bit of a combination of like a futuristic landscape versus a more of a Silver Age conflict that we see in here. The art style during this older story is kind of what you would expect. It's actually got a pretty cool classic vibe to it, so I did appreciate that. So we do have some Hank Pym in here. We have a little bit of the Wasp in here. There's just like a classic story where Hank kind of goes out. He's kind of like a Mr. Fantastic. He's just so focused on his work that he can't just take a night off. And he gets rather bored one night during a movie, while they're out going to see a movie, and he gets into some trouble, and some people have to bail him out. So that's basically the story here. And then we kind of get pulled into the future a little bit by like a future Ant-Man, and it's gonna be pretty interesting. So they're gonna have to team up and face whatever threat they're facing right now in the future. So not a bad read. I was kind of bored going through it because I kind of forgot the narrative that they set up in the beginning, that it's actually a future oriented book, and they just dip into the past to pull Hank Pym forward into the future. So I kind of forgot that narrative as I was reading through it, and it kind of had just like an old school vibe throughout most of this book. And then at the very, very end, they tie you back in and they let you know, oh no, this is actually going to be set in the future. We're just pulling legacy characters from the past to help out with whatever the threat is currently. So interesting idea. I don't know about how the execution is going to be going forward, but it might be an interesting thing to see like the old school vibe meets the new school vibe and how they clash in a futuristic landscape. That might be interesting. I'll probably stick around for another issue or two and just kind of see where it goes. Next Marvel book we read this week was Star Wars Obi-Wan issue #3. This is from Christopher Cantwell. And again, it kind of starts off the way that the other issues have started off with our, I'm not going to say present day Obi-Wan because we all know what's going on there, but this is basically an older Obi-Wan sitting down, waiting for this inevitable and perhaps metaphorical storm to come through his city, which might end up taking everything out. And he's sitting out at the table, and he's actually thinking about the past and writing down some stories from when he was a younger general, and when he was a Jedi Knight in the Academy and things like that. And so it's a series of unconnected stories that play into the narrative of this looming threat that's coming to him physically and perhaps metaphorically. In the first issue, we explored when he was a young child, kind of coming up through the academy and some of the friends that he made. In the second issue, we focused on a mission with him and Anakin and how they kind of saved this little mining facility, if I'm not mistaken. And in this issue here, it's basically a story about how he led this battalion into war and all the casualties that they had during that war. So this one was at least action-packed, and a lot of cool things were going on. It's very clone-specific or clone-centered. So if you enjoy the clones and you enjoy some of the random battles that they had throughout their legacy, this is going to be a pretty interesting issue for you, I think. But yeah, like the other two issues, this one's focusing on the loss that he's felt throughout his life and throughout his military and Jedi career, perhaps. And yeah, it was a pretty interesting one. Again, I don't quite know what the overall narrative is in this one. It's cool to kind of dip back in the Obi-Wan's past and see the different things that he was involved with and some of the different side missions and things like that we didn't see maybe in the shows or in the movies or whatnot. But I'm kind of craving that what does all this mean kind of a thing. I'm kind of craving that answer right now, and I'm not quite getting it just yet, but we're going to keep reading it because it's still pretty interesting. And yeah, Obi-Wan's a cool character, and we're on issue number 3. We'll see where it goes. All right, and the next Marvel book we read was a big milestone issue. We have ASM number 900, or according to the new numbering right here, we're on issue number 6. So depending on which one you want to follow, that's what we got going on. I got this cool variant cover because it had like the Sinister Six. It almost has like a Gleason vibe to it. It's got like the Sinister Six on there with Spider-Man in the middle. So I thought that was going to be pretty cool. And I didn't know going into this if it was going to be a complete departure from our current ASM run and how jarring that experience would be to kind of have that Tombstone arc and then jumping right into this, and it would be something completely different. But that was actually the case here. This is a completely different story involving a whole different set of characters, and it seems like all the setup and the backstory and everything that we've had so far in the previous ASM issues 1 through 5 is almost completely ignored, and then we're jumping right into this, which is basically a big story that has a big legacy vibe to it, which I'm sure your old school fans are going to love. But essentially, we have some kind of a robotic combination of the Sinister Six attacking Peter Parker, using his friends to get to him, and it's basically just a giant-sized issue of how he's going to overcome that with the help of his friends. Now, again, if you have some long understanding of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, there's lots of interesting throwbacks in here and lots of references to previous very old issues. And so I think you're going to get a kick out of that. Even if you don't have that kind of knowledge, I think you'd still appreciate some of the stuff they do in here. Art-wise, it's pretty cool. I'm kind of, I would like to see this art style in the main run. And I'm kind of, I'm not a big fan of JR, but I did actually miss flipping through the panels and like dissecting some of the weird anatomy that he uses from time to time. So we have Ed McGuinness on the pencils, and we had John Romita Jr. on some of the art, on some of the covers rather. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't anything great. It was just, you know, if you like the Sinister Six, you'll like this one. The action was pretty interesting. It's your classic, you know, Spider-Man story in here. Nothing too breathtaking. There's a couple back side stories in here as well at the very, very end. And then there's actually a little advertisement for ASM number 7. So we'll see if anything that happens in this issue rolls over into issue number 7, because it didn't feel like there was a lot of rollover from 1 through 5 into 6. It seemed just like a random long story they wanted to tell all of a sudden, and I didn't quite see the connection they made between the other issues. But let me know if I missed something down below. All right, the next Marvel book we read this week was Jessica Jones. This is the variants. This is issue number 2, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, so we have Gail Simone and Phil Noto on the art, which I actually really like Phil Noto because the expressions that they're able to create on the characters' faces, they're always unique, and they're very expressional. Like the eye movements and just the different faces that they make in the situations. I think they do a great job with doing that in here. So you always know how the characters are feeling just based on the facial expressions alone. So I do appreciate that. The overall art style is pretty interesting in this book, and so I do like that. But basically, this is a story about Kilgrave, about the Purple Man, invading Jessica Jones's mind once again. It's the 10-year anniversary coming up, and a former victim of Kilgrave actually warned Jessica that this could happen on the 10th anniversary. And so we're exploring what that actually means. And we're approaching that 10-year anniversary now. On top of that, Jessica Jones is actually introduced to several variants of her own self. We have like a Captain America variant, and we have a couple other variants that show up in this book. And there's really no explanation about why that's happening just yet. But it's pretty interesting to see what happens when all those personalities come together. And there's a lot of cool action scenes and some Luke Cage stuff in here and some Daredevil moments in here as well. So the variants, it's pretty interesting. It has two main threads right now. We have this Kilgrave anniversary, mind control struggle going on right now. And then we have these mysterious variants showing up, and we don't quite know why that's happening yet. So two interesting things happening at once. So we're going to continue getting this book, because I haven't read a Jessica Jones book in quite a long time, and it's pretty interesting so far. So we'll keep checking it out. What'd you guys think? All right, that was it for Marvel books. We're going to jump over into DC next. We're going to start off with Sandman Universe, Nightmare Country. This is issue number 4 from James Tynion. I love that I love that cover art on here with what is that, Mr. Ecstasy and Mr. Agony, if I'm not mistaken. And then we have the Smiling Man up here in the top corner as well. So this book has actually been pretty fun. Again, it's my first introduction to the Sandman universe. I actually have the Volume 1 Omnibus over in the corner, leather bound and everything, and I want to dig into that. I know the show is coming out pretty soon, so I need to get educated on some Sandman stuff. But this is not a bad place to start, I guess, right here. So where are we with this one? So basically, we have our main character who's actually being chased down by the Smiling Man. She doesn't quite know what's going on. She met the Corinthian. He's a pretty interesting character. They do dive into some of his maybe perhaps more modern backstory, I guess. I'm not entirely sure what his previous backstories were, but they do touch on him and perhaps his childhood and kind of how he came up in a way. That's kind of how I was seeing it in here. And we have this really weird, eccentric, rich guy who's collecting all this murder memorabilia. And he kind of explores that and has somewhat kidnapped her in a way, because he wants to get more and more high value possessions or high value acquisitions into his collection. And he thinks that maybe if he kidnaps her, he can draw in some of these weird killers like the Corinthian or the Smiling Man or something like that and add it to his collection. That's at least how I'm reading it in here. So it's a pretty cool thing, pretty interesting move in here. So we have Mr. Agony and Mr. Ecstasy showing up on the scene. Their job is to get rid of this main character here by orders. And they have a pretty creative way that they're going to go around some of the rules that were put in place and using some of her friends, reanimating them and into like a zombie type mode. So it's a pretty interesting way that they're getting around some of these rules and everything. It's a weird, twisted story, but it is pretty interesting and it's pretty fun. So I do like that. And of course we get Corinthian showing up at the very, very end. And there looks like there's going to be some kind of supernatural showdown towards the end, which should be pretty cool. But yeah, this book is pretty twisted. It is James Tynion doing some stuff. So if you can imagine some of his other works that he's done, Nice House in the Lake, Department of Truth, something like that, it has that flavor, it has that vibe to it. This one is can be at times ultra violent, and the concepts are pretty high in here, which I think is pretty fun. And so I'm having a ball with it. Let me know what you guys are thinking about Sandman Nightmare Country down below. All right, the next DC book we read this week was Swamp Thing from Rom V. This is issue number 15. We only have 16 issues in this run. This is season 2, originally slated for 10 issues and got extended to 16. And thankfully it did, because this issue was really good. So again, where we left off in issue number 14, we essentially have all these different amalgamations of different concepts. We have like the mechanical, artificial devouring gears, kind of an avatar that has shown up right now. We of course have our Swamp Thing. We have our new character Trinity that has just showed up, and she's basically like avatar of destruction and nuclear power and things like that. And she's a little bit hesitant still. She's just trying to understand the landscape. She was showing some kindness from a random human stranger in the past, and so she's kind of heading in the right direction, but she's still very untapped, and you don't quite know which way she's going to go yet. And I feel like she's going to be the thing that really changes the tide in this war between these different avatars right now. So basically, we have Hal Jordan, we have Swamp Thing teaming up, kind of combining powers in a pretty interesting way to buff up Swamp Thing a little bit. And it's a big battle against the mechanics, against the Mechanica, against the Gears, the Parliament of Gears. And it's really kind of breathtaking how they can handle the art style in here from Spicer and Perkins. That combination of line work, the inkers and everything, and the colorist is just really, really amazing in this book. There's lots of really cool full page spreads. The composition and the layout of the different panels in here is really, really creative. And just the color scheme they use between everything. Sometimes it's very muddy and very green, and then all of a sudden the next page is just bright and vibrant, and it really kind of cuts up the colors a lot. So that is pretty fun from a paneling perspective. But again, this is basically our big battle between Swamp Thing and the Parliament of Gears, with a few allies sprinkled in here as well. So it is winding down here soon. We have Trinity kind of showing up at the end. We don't quite know what her abilities are or which way she's going to swing. We think we know which way that's going to go. And I'm interested to see what this character does in the future, if the character does have a future, because Trinity is pretty interesting. So Swamp Thing from Rom V, it's going to be wrapping up very soon. I'm going to be very sad, but he has jumped on to a few other titles that I'm going to be really excited about continuing to read. And so, yeah, let me know if you've read this one. And if you haven't, I highly recommend getting a collected edition when it does come out, because it is one of the best DC books out right now. Next DC book we read this week was from Mark Russell and the Allreds. We have Superman Space Age. This is book number 1. So in Space Age here, it's almost like a life story in a way. You know how we had those different life story books that have come out in the past where they take basically their history and they distill it down to single moments, and they just barely touch on some things here, but you get the general idea of what kind of happened. There's a little bit of that going on in here. There's a little bit of playfulness as well with the origin story and the different interactions that Superman had throughout his youth to actually build him into the man he is, and before he took over the mantle of Superman. So we do get basically a distilled version of his origin story. We do get more understanding of Papa Kent in here and some of his history that kind of shaped him into the man that he is, and he was able to pass down those lessons over to Clark. And we do get a little bit of a retelling of how he actually got to the suit, how he found the Fortress of Solitude, the responsibility that he's trying to take on, his purpose for being there. It's explored in here as well. And there's other members of the Justice League that are mentioned in here as well. So we got Pariah, we have a little bit of Lois Lane action in here too. So we get to understand where this story might be going in the future from like a crisis perspective. Allred's art in here is awesome. That's an art style it took me a little bit of time to grow into. I remember, I think it was some old X-Force things. It was a pretty jarring transition back in the day with X-Force when I was trying to read through that one when I first started collecting comics. But I actually appreciate that art style now, and I think it's executed really, really well inside of this book, just to kind of give you a little idea of what you're going to be looking at from an art perspective in here. We do have some of these awesome panels right here from Allred. And so, you know, if you like that kind of stuff, I think you're going to like this one. And again, story-wise, it's a very distilled version of the Superman story. Again, it reads like a life story in a way, but I appreciated it. I was flipping through it. We were kind of talking on some other shows about the fact of, should this have been an 80-page book? And there's 3 books of these, I believe. Actually, this read very, very quick. It's not that it doesn't have a lot of dialogue, but I think the way that they've taken the story and put it into like a life story kind of a perspective, it reads really, really fast, and the artwork is really fun. So it didn't feel like it took too long to read. Actually, maybe it only took like a comic and a half time worth of time to actually read this. But it was actually pretty fun, and it flowed pretty well. We have some Bruce Wayne Batman stuff in here too. We have some Lex Luthor stuff. So again, it touches on a lot of concepts and a lot of characters over 80 pages. And so this is actually pretty cool. I would like to see like a collected edition for all 3 books, like a little bit extra size and hardbound. I think that would be really, really cool. We'll see how the other 2 issues go, but number 1 was pretty solid. All right, the next DC book we read this week was Detective Comics from Rom V, highly anticipated book. For me personally, this is Detective Comics 1062. I have not been keeping up with the numbering for Detective Comics until this book. In fact, I don't think I read a Detective comic book since before Fear State, if I'm not mistaken. So it's been a little bit of time for me getting on the Detective comic. But Rom V, Albuquerque's on here, and Dave Stewart on the coloring. So of course we're going to be jumping into here. So I was really interested to see which direction Rom was going to take with this. I knew it was going to be, since it's detective, I figured it's going to be a little bit more close to the vest, a little bit more introspective. And I think that's the direction we're heading in here. And I bet there's going to be some metaphorical stuff, some supernatural stuff thrown in as well. And that was exactly the case. So that was pretty awesome to see. So basically we have a Batman right here who's very, very obsessed with his ability as you can imagine, with his assessment of different situations he's about to get into. He's actually timing himself to perform certain actions, like he's going to bust up some kind of a raid. He assesses the situation, he counts the guards, he looks at the patterns that they're walking in, and he says, oh, in 8 seconds, I should take care of all these things. And so that's an exploration of one of those moments in here, but it kind of goes sideways a little bit. And there's some Lazarus, like zombie mutant kind of action in here too that he did not expect. And so that was a pretty interesting little twist in here. We do get some Talia action in here as well. And she's kind of explaining vaguely what's kind of happening right now, or kind of showing Bruce what actually, who he's actually fighting in the scenes right here. We do get a Bruce that's kind of been weakened a little bit. He doesn't quite know why. He's running a whole bunch of tests, trying to figure out what's going on. It's a little bit of facing his own mortality in a way. And we have a little bit of Dick Grayson in here too, kind of poking fun at him from time to time in this book. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays forward. Are we going to get a Bruce Wayne who's a little bit slower? He's kind of at the end of his career, perhaps. I don't know how they're going to handle this for future issues. The story did split towards the back end a little bit into this other story about this other organization that's invading Gotham right now. And it mostly has to do with somebody who's going to come in to kind of take over Gotham in some kind of a way. And they've actually implanted some of their resources into Gotham already. And they're doing some, they're cleaning up some messes in Gotham already. So that really hasn't been explored just yet. And of course, there's a supernatural element at the end as well that we have to explore further. So again, there's lots of like possible metaphors, some supernatural things in here. Bruce is getting a little bit older. He's kind of slowing down a little bit. Was he affected by this monster he fought in this battle? We're still trying to figure that one out. The backstory in here was actually really, really good too, from Cy Spurrier and Danny on the art. So if you're into that combination, from Order of the New World that just came out recently, like Coffin Bound, things like that, I think you're going to enjoy this. And of course, we have our classic Danny artwork on here, which is great. It's about Jim Gordon. Again, he's kind of facing his mortality as well. He's getting older. He's trying to be relevant. He's trying to be useful still. And he gets a tip from this young woman, or from this lady, about someone that's missing in her life, and it has to do with Arkham. So he's kind of exploring that and seeing what's going on. Pretty interesting book in here. And so this is going to be a part 3, or a 3-part story of Jim Gordon, presumably in the back of Detective Comics going forward. But we're going to keep going and getting these because awesome creative team, cool character, intriguing plot, and an interesting hook at the end. So what more could you ask for? The last DC book we read this week was One Dark Night from Jock. This is book number 3 in this DC Black Label format. I do like these books a lot, although I can't bag and board them because I don't have any of these bags and boards. I keep them on my trade wall though. And that seems to work out just fine. This has been a pretty interesting run right now. It's a pretty basic, ill-equipped Batman who's ushering the villain EMP through Gotham City, I believe from like jail over into Arkham City. So he has to travel the entire length of Gotham City, and this is after EMP exploded, so like resources are down, equipment's offline, all the gangs know that he's on his way out there, and so it's just a big story about how Batman can physically usher this guy who's weakened through Gotham City, through all the different gangs, through the corrupt police. And so yeah, that's what we get in this book. I think one of the biggest strengths of this book is Jock on the art style, and especially in this format, because you get this really awesome ability to just completely spread everything open, and it's really, really beautiful to see what he does here. Batman actually resorts to going underground in here, and they take advantage of that situation by bringing in some classic villains like Killer Croc and his goons. And so it's just absolutely amazing what he can do with this art. And I actually really, really enjoyed this book. There's a whole narrative in here about EMP himself and his family and his son, and there's some corrupt cops in here, and we get to understand what their motivations are and what they're up to. But basically, again, this is Batman carrying EMP on his shoulder to Gotham, through the streets, and through all the hell from all the different gangs and everything. So it's actually pretty fun. I did really enjoy this book a lot. It's only 3 books. This is a $6.99 for a DC Black Label, so I think it's worth it. It was a pretty cool story. So if you see these on the shelf, I would recommend picking them up. All right, we're out of the big 2. We're going to jump over into some indie books. We're going to start with Boom Studios with Something is Killing the Children, issue number 25. And in this issue, we do get a lot of Erica Slaughter. We get some action in here. We get that new House of Cutter lady in here. We touch on Gabby a little bit, and we touch on some of the resources that Erica's been using kind of off the books as of late, and maybe she shouldn't be doing that, and there's some prices to pay when it comes to that. But essentially, we have Gabby picking up Erica's totem, if I'm not mistaken, a little octopus doll who's giving her not so great advice at the moment, kind of leading Gabby over to this replicant monster that we really haven't seen before, but has caused all this tragedy in this arc of Something's Killing the Children. And we have Erica Slaughter trying to figure out where Gabby is and hunting her down, kind of saving the day in a way. But kind of at what price, right? So we do have a lot of that House of Cutter. I forget what her actual name is. I'm not sure if we actually got her name in here, but we understand she is extremely brutal and she'll do anything she can to get to Erica. So we do have our first interaction with those two characters in here in a pretty tragic way, which I think was pretty resonating. And you can just imagine how Erica's feeling at the end of this book. The art in here by Del Era, man, it's really, really good. Some of the paneling it feels a little different than the other Something's Killing the Children books. The way that it was drawn, the paneling and the layouts, and it was actually pretty cool. I was really digging what I was seeing here. So there's some pretty cool action scenes with Erica and this duplicate monster right here. So yeah, we'll see more of this duplicate, and I think it's a pretty cool place to go down because the other monsters we saw were very like insect-like, and this is the first one that kind of mimics what a human would look like in a way. And so it's pretty cool to explore that territory in this universe, that not all these monsters look like just giant insects, you know? There's other versions of these monsters out here. So I believe this is going to be the slow build up to our Erica versus the Cutter Lady coming up pretty soon. This was their first interaction, and it went really south for Erica in a way. And so we're going to be slowly building up to their fight here coming up pretty soon. Something's Killing the Children, number 25. I thought it was pretty solid. Sticking with the Something's Killing the Children universe, we have House of Slaughter issue number 7 from basically the same creative team. And I was going into this issue with high expectations, I think, and I'm not sure if they were met. I think it's just a completely different vibe book than what we saw in the first arc of House of Slaughter and what we see in Something's Killing the Children, which isn't necessarily bad. But we spent this entire issue here with, I believe our main character is Edwin in here, and his main role in here is actually to investigate some different areas where monster sightings could be. And he's got this special relationship with his totem, which is actually a possessed paintbrush, and he does a lot of paintings in here to help reveal some of the secrets, I believe, or to help catalog some of the monsters that are out there. And so this whole entire issue is basically a conversation between Edwin and his totem, and it's this interesting exchange of how his totem is actually kind of bored and doesn't really know what they're doing on this particular mission. So Edwin's telling him all these horrible stories that may or may not have actually taken place, and so it was a weird issue. Like, not a whole lot of things happen in here, and they actually break it up into 2 different parts. There's a part 1 and a part 2 inside of this book, which I really didn't see coming, but with that said, the art style is pretty interesting. It is rather beautiful. It's just there's really nothing that happens in this book. And of course, there's a gigantic cliffhanger at the end. So it makes me believe that I'm just not perceiving what's happening in here. And I'm not picking up on all the clues and details and metaphors that they're using in here. And there's actually some big looming threat that is coming to get them. So we'll see where this one goes. This one has me a little bit confused at the moment. I'm not entirely sure what we're doing here. I'm not entirely sure what they're setting up. And yeah, it just has me more confused than anything else. So issue number 7 of House of Slaughter, what did I miss? What did you guys read into this? Let me know down below in the comments. All right, and that was it with Boom Studios. We're going to jump over into Image Comics. We have a new number 1 from volume 3 of Magic Order from Mark Millar. And so this is actually, again, volume 3, issue number 1. So you really need to read the first 2 volumes to kind of understand where we are with these characters, because without it, you're going to be a little bit lost. But they do a decent job of being a little bit new reader friendly in here. They do introduce you to, or reintroduce you to, the characters that we met in the previous volumes. And they do play on some of the knowledge that we had in those other volumes. So if you haven't read volume 1 and 2, you kind of need to kind of get into this, but you can jump into the here cold and just kind of see where it takes you, although you'll miss some of the little nuances that they do bring up in here. But basically, Magic Order is a pretty interesting world that we live in. It's basically like a real mature Harry Potter in a way. There's this real ancient Magic Order that's out there right now. It's set in a modern time, but it does play a lot into the history of the Order and some of the villains that they had, especially in volume number 2. In volume number 1, they dealt with a lot of internal drama and a lot of backstabbing and Magic Order versus like the evil Magic Order and the interplay between those two and the fight between resources. So we're going to see where issue number 3 goes in here. There's a lot of creative, cool uses of magic in here that we haven't really seen before. It's not a bunch of just, wand waving and spell casting. There's a lot of interesting things that happen in here. So from a creativity and a magic creativity perspective, it's actually pretty interesting. And so I do like that in the book, sometimes more than the story itself. And so when they're actually fighting, the magic that's used is pretty cool. Again, it's not just like waving wands and shooting sparks at people. It's this whole other realm of how you can use magic in certain battles, and different people have different strengths in different areas of magic and the occult. So that is pretty cool. So if you're into that whole magic thing, if you want like a matured Harry Potter with a lot of like backstory and a lot of family drama and things like that, check out Magic Order. Number 1's out. You might want to pick up volume number 1 and number 2, but you probably could jump into this one cold and do okay. But we'll see how far this goes in the future issues. So let me know if you guys read Magic Order and what you thought about it. All right, the next Image book we read this week was I Hate This Place. This is issue number 3. This is actually from Kyle Starks and Toplin on the art. And this is, again, it's just like another fun book. It's nothing too groundbreaking, but it's actually pretty intriguing, and the premise is pretty simple and easy to follow so far. But essentially you have this couple on the front right here. One of the ladies has lost a grandmother or something like that, and they actually were given the house in the will. Although the house is haunted, the property is haunted, and they learn the rules of engagement with this property after they move in. They kind of freak out a little bit, as one would, and they don't quite know what to do. So they start turning to all these different resources locally. They go to this medium. This medium freaks out because she actually sees what's going on. And now they hired this ghost hunter to come onto the property to help them solve this thing. And this ghost hunter is both prepared and unprepared at the same time, and realizes that this is way above his head, and there's some pretty crazy stuff that's going on in here. So I'll give you a little bit of a hint on the art style itself in here. It's kind of basic, but it's actually pretty fun at the same time. This team right here almost has like an Abraham's Army from Walking Dead vibe to it. The ghosts are pretty crazy in here. There's basically rules where, you don't go out at night, you don't go into the woods, you don't let the ghosts touch you. And there's some examples of why you don't want those things to happen inside of this book, with some unlucky or unfortunate characters that they introduce and then quickly get rid of in here. So it's a pretty interesting conundrum to have. They're essentially locked in this property and they don't know what to do. They can't get out because of all these ghosts and things like that, and all these rules that are set into place. And so, yeah, it's a pretty fun, interesting book. If you haven't read it yet, I would highly recommend checking it out. Again, it's one of those fun books. It helps break up some of the other books that are pretty heavy, because you can read this one and there's some levity to it. And there's actually some emotion in here too. And it's a pretty interesting story, so I would recommend it. The next book from Image, I kind of took a chance on it because I didn't know anything about it, but it's The Hollows. This is actually an Image book from cover by Sam Keith. He actually drew it as well, and Chris Rail on the story. So again, I didn't know anything about this book. I just took a chance on it, and it was a $10 book, and it is square bound. It's oversized, probably 80 pages, and it's broken up into different chapters. But one thing I will say about it is, with Sam Keith's art, it actually is rather beautiful. It's got like this pencil drawing kind of a look to it, and it is pretty cool. They're setting up an interesting world here, and I bet it's built on a bunch of metaphors and things like that as well. But basically there's this giant world tree that's kind of artificial, and it's towering over this like muddy landscape of like deviants and things like that. And there's a lot of like soul-sucking aspects of the creatures down there below, and there's also some remaining humans that are just trying to like survive. And then, of course, as you go up the tree, you have this like higher and higher society going up. We basically touch base with this man who's kind of obsessed over something right now. And I'm not entirely sure what he's obsessed about, but he's kind of ignoring his family. He's going on some supply runs and things like that, using some technology that he developed on his own, which allows him to kind of fly and navigate around this tree. But he does get into trouble and does actually crash land, and he actually interacts with some of the people living down below. And of course, they have all these assumptions about him living up there, that he's got like a perfect life, and what is he doing down here, and what's going on. And he's got this understanding of them being like lower level perhaps, or living in a dangerous way, and he doesn't quite understand why they would settle for something like this. So it's an interesting clash of personalities and perspectives down there. Again, the art style does shift a little bit to almost like this like blue ballpoint pen on a notebook kind of a vibe on here from time to time. Kind of reminds me of like a Jim Rugg kind of a drawing from time to time. but it is pretty fun. It is pretty creative. It is an interesting world that they're in. Again, it almost looks like someone just grabbed a couple notebook pieces of paper with some pens and actually drew this out and then went ahead and colored it. The composition and layouts are okay. I feel like, you know, they don't take advantage of all the space on the page, because they got these giant black bars from time to time everywhere, so that is rather annoying when they do that, especially when you appreciate the art. You want to see it blown out a little bit more. And again, this is multi-chaptered, and so I just read chapter number 1. I think we have, I don't know, 3 or 4 chapters in this book. So I might read 1 chapter a week until I finish this, because we had a few other giant-sized issues coming out this week, and so I just settled for the first chapter in this one. But I'll let you know if it's any good. If you've already read this one, let me know if I should keep reading it. And the last book we read this week was from Chip Zdarsky. We have Public Domain issue number 2, and man, this is quite a commentary on some of the conversations that you hear, or you could imagine being told inside of closed doors from all these different creators that are out there from all these different projects and everything. And so basically this is an exploration of a creative team that came up with this comic book idea that was highly successful back in the day. It was adopted into like a film or TV kind of a thing. And so it's absolutely lucrative now. But, you know, some of the creators that are behind the scenes might not be getting compensated as fairly as they think. A lot of the families involved now. And so there's all sorts of opinions about how this should be handled going forward, especially when they discover some changes in some of the rights of the characters in here based on some old contracts they found. So the family's kind of going crazy right now as far as, you know, compensation possibilities and things like that. And so it's a rather interesting commentary about how things are handled right now, which I think is pretty fun. I know when I'm reading this book or having those kinds of conversations with people, you know, when an MCU movie makes $1 billion or more, you know, how much money do the actual original creators or families of those creators that are still around, do they get properly compensated for that success? And, you know, we've heard horror stories of people getting $4,000 checks on $1 billion movies or whatever it was. And so that's kind of a kick in the balls. But as the great Robert Meyer Burnett would say, it's show business, not show friends. And you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. But, you know, with that said, it's hard to, I can live on both sides of the fences when it comes to that discussion for sure. But again, this is really interesting. The family's more involved in here. They think Dad should have more royalties from his creations. He's kind of given that up in the past. Some new evidence comes to light. Some of the sons go rogue, or one of the sons goes rogue against the company, kind of rages against the machine a little bit. And so we understand a little bit more about his drive to do that, or why he would do that. Maybe he's got some past demons that this would kind of solve or resolve for him personally. So yeah, it's an interesting take. It's not just about creator versus creator. It's like creator versus creator with all the family drama involved into it too. So it's a pretty cool like look into the process behind closed doors. So it's a pretty interesting book. So I would highly recommend checking it out. Chip Zdarsky's a great writer. Issue number 2, not a bad read. So that's everything that I read this week, and those are my thoughts about them. Let me know what your pick of the week was down below, or if you had any clarifying thoughts about any of the books that I went over. But as always, I appreciate you watching the video. Please like, subscribe, share, and hit that bell notification to be notified of future videos. As always, I appreciate you watching again. See you in the comments.